It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me, my girlfriend Jenna, and an endless open road ahead of us. We planned to take the scenic route, cutting through old, less traveled roads to enjoy the quiet countryside. We drove through a thick forest as the sun was setting down, casting long, eerie shadows across the winding road. A heavy fog began rolling in, and soon we could barely see 10 feet ahead of us. As we drove deeper into the woods, my GPS lost signal, and the paved road turned into cracked asphalt, then gravel. I was getting nervous, but Jenna just laughed it off, saying it was all part of the adventure. Then we saw it. A figure standing on the side of the road, just barely visible through the mist. It was a man, dressed in dark clothing, and he was waving at us. I slowed down, trying to get a better look. He didn't seem hurt, but there was something off. He was unnaturally still, almost like he was waiting for us. Jenna got a strange look on her face and whispered, "Don't stop." I felt a chill, but something compelled me to pull over anyway. As we came to a stop, the man started walking toward the car, a blank expression on his face. He moved in an unnaturally slow, deliberate way, his steps perfectly even, as if they were on a track. I rolled down the window a crack, just enough to ask if he needed any help. He leaned down, looking right into my eyes, and I noticed his skin. It was pale, too pale, almost waxy. His eyes seemed too big, like they were reflecting light that wasn't there. "Hey, can I get a ride?" He asked, his voice cold and hollow, almost mechanical. Before I could answer, Jenna grabbed my arm. Her face was pale as well. "Just go. Please, please, just drive." Something in her tone jolted me, and I threw the car into gear, speeding away without looking back. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the road, staring after us, unmoving. A few miles later, we started to relax. Jenna laughed nervously, saying maybe he was just some weird guy. But the feeling of dread lingered on. We tried to shake it off, joking about the encounter, when the headlights illuminated something up ahead. It was him, the same man, standing by the side of the road, still as a statue, waiting for us to approach. I knew we had been driving in a straight line. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of us. I hit the gas, speeding past him without slowing down. We didn't say a word, but I could feel Jenna's fingers dig into my arm. The forest seemed to close in around us as the fog thickened. I drove faster, my hands slick with sweat. Just when I thought we'd left him far behind, we rounded a bend, and there he was again, the same eerie figure standing in the road. This time, he was smiling. I swerved to avoid him, nearly skidding off the road. We didn't dare look back. I kept driving, desperate to reach somewhere, anywhere, with people and lights. Eventually, the road widened, and we found ourselves on a small town's main street. There were lights, a gas station, and a few houses. I parked and sat there, trembling. Jenna was shaking too, her face pale as she gripped my hand. When we told the gas station clerk what happened, he just nodded, almost like he'd heard it all before. "You're not the first to see him. Some say he's a spirit, a ghost looking for a ride. Others say he's something worse. But I'll tell you one thing, kid. No one who's ever picked him up was seen again." That night, we decided to skip the scenic route and drove straight home. Even now, I avoid back roads after dark, especially in the fog. And every so often, I think about the man in the road, waiting for the next car to come along, the next driver who might just be curious enough to stop. It was supposed to be a fun weekend road trip with my college friends. Just me, Pete, and Claire, driving up to the mountains to camp. We'd been on the road for a few hours, laughing and talking, when we decided to stop at a remote gas station to grab some snacks and stretch our legs. The gas station had a creepy vibe. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s, with peeling paint and one dim flickering light outside. Inside, the clerk barely looked up when we walked in, just nodded at us with a blank stare. We were browsing the aisles when I noticed a guy standing by the window watching us. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. When I glanced over, he didn't look away, just kept staring, his gaze cold and unsettling. I felt a shiver run down my spine and nudged my friend Pete, who shrugged it off, saying I was just being paranoid. We grabbed our snacks and went back to the car, but as we were about to pull out, I saw that same guy again. He was standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching us leave. It gave me the creeps, but I figured it was just a weird encounter. A few minutes down the road, we realized we were being followed. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there he was, the same guy from the gas station, driving a beat-up pickup truck, keeping a steady distance behind us. Claire was the first to notice something wasn't right. "He's following us," she whispered, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. I sped up, but so did he, matching our pace. He tried to brush it off as just a coincidence, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We decided to turn off onto a smaller road, hoping he'd give up and continue on the main route. But when we made the turn, he did as well. His headlights grew closer, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, I had enough. I pulled over to a well-lit rest area we spotted up ahead. The same guy pulled over, too, parking a few spaces behind us. He got out of his truck and started walking towards us with a slow, menacing stride. I could see he was holding something in his hand, too. It was glinting underneath the streetlights. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I kept my voice steady as I explained the situation, my eyes never leaving him. The dispatcher told us to stay put and lock the doors. Police would be on their way. The guy was almost at our car now when he noticed me on the phone. He stopped in his tracks, his face twisting in anger. He banged on the driver's side window, yelling at us to get out. We stayed silent, and after what felt like forever, I saw the flash of blue and red lights approaching. The man glanced back, saw the police car, and tried to make a run for it, but it was too late. The officers were out of their car in seconds, guns drawn, ordering him to stop. He didn't listen and tried to run back to his truck, but they caught him before he could get away. When they searched his truck, they found rope, duct tape, and a large hunting knife. The officers told us he was a known criminal with a history of assault charges. They'd been looking for him for weeks after he'd attacked another group of travelers in the area. I felt a wave of relief, but also a lingering fear at how close we'd come to something horrifying. We finished the trip, but I could never fully relax, always watching the mirrors, always checking for headlights behind us. The man was eventually convicted, put away for a long time, but that night still haunts me. Every time I drive down a dark, empty road, I think about him standing there, staring, and what might have happened if we hadn't called the police. We were driving through the middle of nowhere, just me and my buddy Chris. The plan was to make it to our friend's cabin by dawn, so we decided to drive through the night. It was past midnight, and we'd been winding through deserted backroads for hours, the forest pressing in on both sides of the road, making everything feel claustrophobic. I remember thinking about how dark it was out there. No streetlights, no houses, just the empty road stretching ahead. Chris had dozed off, his head leaning up against the window, so it was just me, the hum of the engine, and the headlights cutting through the blackness. Then I noticed something up ahead. There was something in the middle of the road. At first, I thought it was just a deer or maybe some roadkill, but as I got closer, I realized it was something much stranger. I slowed to a stop, squinting outside to make out what it was. It was a large suitcase, old and beat up, lying right in the center of the highway. I stopped the car, nudging Chris awake. "Hey, check this out." He rubbed his eyes and looked ahead, frowning. "What's a suitcase doing in the middle of nowhere?" I shrugged, feeling a bit uneasy, but curiosity got the better of us, so I put the car in park and we stepped outside to take a closer look. The night air was cold and heavy, and the silence out there was unsettling. No sounds of animals, no wind, just silence. The suitcase looked even worse up close. Old, scuffed, and covered in what looked like dried mud. The latches were rusted, and there was a faint, metallic smell coming from it. Chris looked at me, an eyebrow raised. "Should we open it?" Something in me screamed not to, but I nodded. Slowly, he reached down and undid the latches, the metal creaking loudly in the silence. As he lifted the lid, an overpowering stench hit us, something rotten and sickly sweet. Inside the suitcase was a pile of filthy clothes, stained dark and damp. But that wasn't what made us feel sick. As Chris pulled the clothes aside, we saw hair, a lock of matted dark hair sticking out from under the pile. I took a step back, nearly vomiting. Chris hesitated, then lifted the clothing away to reveal a pale, lifeless face beneath. We both froze, the realization sinking in that this wasn't some lost suitcase. It was a body. I stumbled back, feeling the bile rise in my throat. Chris dropped the lid, his face pale. "Dude, we need to call someone." But just as I pulled out my phone, we heard something. A faint crunch of gravel behind us. We turned, and there in the shadows just beyond our headlights was a figure watching us. He was barely visible, standing completely still, just a dark silhouette in the trees. He must have seen us find the suitcase. I didn't need any more convincing. I grabbed Chris's arm, and we bolted back to the car, fumbling with the doors in our panic. Just as we slammed them shut, the figure stepped onto the road, his face illuminated by the headlights. He looked ordinary, in an unsettling way. Just a man in his 40s maybe, with an expression as blank and emotionless as the forest around us. But his eyes, they were fixed on us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I floored it, skidding around the suitcase and speeding down the road. My hands were shaking, and Chris kept glancing back, making sure the man wasn't following us. We drove in silence for what felt like forever, until we finally had signal again and called the police. When the police arrived, they found the suitcase right where we'd left it in the middle of the highway, and the officers confirmed it was our worst fears. It was indeed a body, a young woman who'd been reported missing days earlier. We gave our statements, told them everything we'd seen, but the man, they never found out where he went or who he was. He'd vanished into the night like he was never there. The police assured us that they'd keep searching, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, waiting on some dark, lonely road with another suitcase ready for someone else to find. And every time I drive at night, I think about those headlights catching something unexpected, something horrible, lying right in my path.